I've always been fascinated by fictional characters that were aware of their status. As a kid watching TV, the concept just blew my mind. The TV was the TV and the real world was the real world, so how could someone on TV know that the real world exists? It was many years before I learned to put a name to this phenomenon: breaking the fourth wall. In my experience, fourth wall breaks were typically used as a throwaway gag.
Hey, I remember this scene. We're in the first episode of season 4.
Or a comedic tool. Anything more elaborate was rare. But when I started playing video games, on the other hand, I noticed fourth wall breaks were not only more frequent, but also more sophisticated. Today, I posit that this happens for a reason. This video contains full game spoilers for Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony, Doki Doki Literature Club, and Nier Automata. Minor spoilers for Avatar The Last Airbender, Danganronpa The Animation, The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, and The Stanley Parable are also present. The term fourth wall comes from theater, where whichever room characters were in was supposed to be surrounded by four walls: the back of the set, the two sides of the stage, and finally the metaphorical fourth wall, comprised of the invisible plane between the actors and the audience. Over time, the term just became a generic description of any separation between characters in a fictional world and the audience in the real one. In essence, regardless of media form, there's the diegetic world of the story and the non-diegetic real world outside, and the fourth wall is broken when those two mix. But here, I propose we can differentiate between two different ways this happens. The first, which I'm calling the non-diegetic fourth wall break, is when the real, non-diegetic world bleeds into the diegetic one. In essence, characters become aware of the situation on the other side of the screen and can react to the viewer's presence, for instance. The second, which I'll dub the diegetic fourth wall break, is the other way around, when the diegetic world of the story permeates outwards from the medium and begins to interact with the audience in the real world. The former is common in media such as television and movies. A study from the 90s on how TV viewers react to fourth wall breaks picked what the study's author identified as a representative sample of fourth wall breaks in 5 then popular TV shows. All of them involve characters merely speaking to the audience and acknowledging their existence. This is the purest form of a non-diegetic fourth wall break, where the only breakage comes from mere knowledge about the existence of the audience penetrating the diegetic realm. Simple, but limited in its audience engagement. Indeed, while the study found that people generally like fourth wall breaks, it concludes that the audience's willing suspension of disbelief, so necessary in dramatic programming to allow us to accept plot and action, would most certainly be shattered by breaking the fourth wall, and thus posits that it must be relegated to comedy. Random articles online about the fourth wall seem to share this sentiment. To be fair, there is pushback against this within the literature. Here's a book I found about the fourth wall that explains how it is possible that directly addressing the audience, if done properly, can increase engagement, not decrease it. Still, the point stands. In media like films and movies, most fourth wall breaks are non-diegetic, and empirically are mostly seen in comedic settings.
Did Jet just die? It was really unclear.
Thus, I find the diegetic fourth wall break that much more interesting. This is where the story breaks free of its confines and begins to affect the audience in the real world. I'll illustrate with some case studies in a minute, but my observation is that when we talk about a video game that breaks the fourth wall, we're overwhelmingly talking about something in this category. And that's not just me. Professor of Games and Interactivity at the Swinburne University of Technology, Stephen Conway, writes that fourth wall breaks in games tend to uniquely blur the boundaries between game and everyday life, and identifies this as different from what he calls traditional fourth wall breaks, or what I've titled as non-diegetic. And this is where the interactive format of video games becomes an asset. It's easy to claim that video games are interactive, other mediums are passive, and so there's a difference and we call it a day, and a video. However, Professor Thomas Lamar from UChicago cautions in his book against simply pinning interactivity as the magic bullet that makes video games unique, since audience engagement is actually not limited to video games alone. Still, interactivity isn't the only feature of the medium. Professor Rachel Hutchinson for the University of Delaware writes that the coded limitations on the player's actions, in other words, the mechanics of the games, forms a sort of procedural rhetoric that itself is a powerful storytelling tool. And even Lamar agrees that games are a point-to-point experience in contrast to broadcast media's one-to-many. These features make games particularly well suited to pulling off a good diegetic fourth wall break. Because while other media can do it, the ability for games to use their mechanics to manipulate and guide the player's actions, and the one-to-one relationship the player has with the game they're playing makes it easier to achieve in games, and thus games are more likely to do so. Alright, that's all the research I did. Let's look at some games. In roughly increasing magnitude, in terms of the extent to which the fourth wall is broken, I'll start with how awareness can become diegetic. Earlier, I argued that characters merely being aware of their position is practically the dictionary definition of a non-diegetic fourth wall break. But I'll qualify that by noting most of the examples were comedic in nature and don't directly play into the plot. If, however, the characters utilize their knowledge of the outside world to critique or satirize the real world, now they've begun to export substance back out through the fourth wall, and at that point I argue it becomes diegetic. Take Danganronpa V3, Killing Harmony. The big twist is that everything was fictional. The whole Killing game was actually scripted and being held for us, the audience, and we willingly watch the Killing game because it's entertaining.
You guys out there beyond the fourth wall already knew that, right?
If we want to get technical about it, arguably this isn't a real fourth wall break, as technically the audience is in universe, but the fandom at large certainly seems to consider it one. And the game itself is conducive to being read this way. When Kibo starts taking audience input, the player is asked for that input. More importantly, regarding this as a true fourth wall break doesn't noticeably change the thematic content of the final trial. Swap Team Danganronpa for a Spike Chunsoft, swap 5344, and swap show for a game, and notice that nothing has appreciably changed. So I'll talk as if this was a real fourth wall break. Viewed through that lens, when Tsumugi says that the audience gets bored waiting for someone to die, she's referring to us. And as a player rushing through the free time events to get to the trials, I'm guilty as charged. When characters point out how twisted it is that friends forced to kill each other could possibly be someone's entertainment, that's us they're talking about. And when they accuse us of putting them through this pain just so we can see a happy ending, they're not wrong. As Shuichi says, the audience wants to see Hope win. And so
it's because Hope wins that the killing never stops. It's what the people want. They want Hope to win. They want the happy ending. That's how the Killing game has gone on 53 times.
They're right. They've suffered while we've enjoyed, and the fact that these fictional characters are within the diegetic confines of the story upset at us, the real audience, for putting them through these things is representative of that story leaking out into our world. But this is also the type of commentary least unique to video games. Indeed, the Danganronpa media mix itself provides the counterexample. In the TV adaptation of the first game, one episode ends with the characters discovering their predicament is being broadcast on TV.
Wait, we're...
Why are we on television?
After that, Monokuma turns to directly face camera as he promises a trial when we come back.
Courts alert, Junior Dicks! You know the drill. Investigation, then trial!
Right as the episode cuts to credits. The implication being that we were the audience Monokuma claims the Killing games were broadcast for. So clearly a TV show can make the same point. But even here, the game utilizes its mechanics to sell this better. When Kibo is introduced as the audience surrogate, the player takes control of Kibo, proving the role. When Tsumugi claims that the audience just wants Hope, the standard trial minigames kick in, trying to goad Shuichi into choosing Hope like we the players have done for the past 2 games. That we deliberately choose not to play the minigames represents the players taking the side of these characters precisely because they have pled their case to us, the players out in the real world, taking their diegetic problems out past the fourth wall.
I fully accepted this request.
We are perpetually trapped in a never-ending spiral of life and death.
Is this a curse? Or some kind of punishment?
While characters continue to exist within the world of the story, the game itself, and how we interact with its mechanics, exist in the real world. As such, unlike the story, the game exists in the same plane as the player. And so, if the game itself becomes a participant in the story, then the story naturally escapes the confines of the diegetic world and seeps out into the real one. The easy example is the Stanley Parable, where the player interacts more with the narrator than the game itself. This is obvious because the narrator is addressing the player themselves, but direct address is not necessary to make this work. Let's look at Nier Automata. Throughout the game, hacking is a major mechanic, where you play a brief bullet hell shooter to hack something and make it do what you want, usually explode. The game also features a diegetic UI, where every UI element is part of the android's own visors, and so are fully in-universe. In the final battle of Route D, if 9S keeps hacking A2, eventually he ends up hacking a strangely familiar looking field that slowly zooms out to reveal itself as the pause menu, A2's pause menu, thus proving that 9S is directly hacking a core part of the game itself that has been established to exist in universe. But there's more. When everyone dies and the game is over, the credits start rolling. And while the credits are rolling, you get to play a bullet hell shooter, the same one from the hacking minigame. The plot is technically over at this point. Credits are something that the game shows for the real-world player's benefit. Yet here is a diegetic element established to have in-universe story significance intruding into the credits. Indeed, the pods even commentate as you, joined by allies from around the world, hack the credits, which symbolize the creators of the game. We, the audience, are unsatisfied with the unhappy ending, and so we're literally hacking the people who made the game itself in order to get a happier one, which you get when you beat the sequence. Here then, through the use of its mechanics, what Hutchinson referred to as procedural rhetoric, Nier Automata elevates a diegetic story mechanic to the same plane as the viewer by bringing it into something traditionally part of the game and not the story. The credits in this case. In doing so, it breaks the fourth wall by turning a fictional struggle into a real one. I, a real human, am fighting the game on behalf of the fictional characters trapped within it. Most interesting to me is when a game manages to use a real-world process as a mechanic. The Legend of Zelda: Phantom Hourglass has this one sequence where you have an image on top and your map on the bottom, and you are instructed to figure out how to stamp the thing onto your own map. The solution is to physically close the Nintendo DS's lid, bringing the two screens together in the real world. Conway addresses this type of mechanic in his article, arguing that it broadens the boundaries of the fourth wall, or he calls it a magic circle, to bring the hardware of the console into the diegetic world. But I'm not sure I agree. The characters still don't know that the DS exists, so clearly the DS is not part of the game world. Instead, I see this as the game bleeding out into the physicality of the DS itself. The stamp and map have essentially transcended the game world out past the fourth wall to become one with the DS hardware. No game takes this further than Doki Doki Literature Club. When Monica hijacks the game's script, she effectively becomes the game. And now the game, personified by Monica, becomes the thing we must defeat, which elevates Monica to our plane, as discussed in the last section, but DDLC goes one further. With the game itself going rogue, even using in-game mechanics becomes untenable. Instead, we move the fight into the real world using my computer's real functions. DDLC's final boss is defeated not with weapons or magic spells, but with Windows Explorer, where I take Monica's character file and drag it into the recycle bin. This is my real computer. It is a real tool. I do real work on it. And yet, the game has co-opted this real-world function of my computer and used it to tell its story. The diegetic has bled so far out past the fourth wall that it has claimed my computer's operating system for itself. And that's what made it such a memorable experience. You could try to do this in another medium. Perhaps a theater performance might have an actor come into the audience and engage with an audience member on real-world terms. But even if that worked, only one audience member would get the experience. You'd need as many actors as people in the audience to ensure everyone enjoys this, and that's just not cost-effective. Since games are inherently point-to-point, as Lamar calls it, where every player engages with the game on their own terms, this suddenly becomes feasible, and thus we get games that do it. The concept of immersion is a huge deal in the gaming community. Perhaps that's why so many games go for a fourth wall break. Because while non-diegetic fourth wall breaks are prone to break the suspension of disbelief, video games make it easy for that to happen the other way around. When games use their mechanics to break out into the real world and use the player's actions to tell their story, that's when it really starts to make you feel
like you're Batman.
Alright, I'm sorry, I'll stop.